We'll go ahead and start the second panel now, focusing on local contexts in the IFP. And chairing that panel, we have Pat Rosenfeld from the Rockefeller Archive Center, who is an expert on the history of philanthropy generally and has written on the Carnegie Corporation and other topics. So thank you. Pat.
Like Joan, this is a little daunting for someone. We're height challenged here. So I'm going to stand over here too. Let me know if you don't hear me, because sometimes my voice wanders from the microphone. Thank you, Sean, and thanks to Kay Lee and Rajika and Celeste for organizing this, and all the colleagues for organizing this really important symposium, and for asking me to moderate this panel on local context. I am really delighted to be the moderator for this panel on local context. The researchers that we're going to hear from today, all IFP fellows, have been taking the more macro level studies from the previous panel and bringing them down to the individual work by contacting and collating and comparing the data from fellows in their topics that they're working on. But before I introduce you to the fellows, I want to say why I am so pleased to be here today. There are three interrelated reasons. First, I am always excited, and it is exciting for all of us, to hear from the talent around the world who are contributing to greater understanding and sensitivities about ways to strengthen and enhance communities and their sustainability. And the IFP program and all the fellows are exemplars of that process. And second, it's a personal privilege for me to be here because I am a member of the expert working group on the alumni tracking study led by Rajika at IIE and her colleagues there. Over the last 3 years, and this is also a very special way of organizing such a study. It doesn't always happen this way with outside groups. Over the last 3 years in the meetings of the expert panel, they have been IIE, Rajika and her team, have been actively involving the expert working group in all of the decisions. We listen to each other. It's a real partnership, and we hope it will contribute to much greater understanding of the deep and broad impacts of the International Fellowship Program. And in fact, what's really wonderful is to hear from the fellows today and know that they are also going to be partners in this process through the comparative work that they're doing and the in-depth studies of the fellows as well. And finally, before I actually get to the introductions, just one more thing I must say. I believe that this is the very, very first time there has ever been an extensive, sustained, systematic, longitudinal, and really longitudinal at 10 years, evaluation of a major fellowship program. I say this not only as someone who has run fellowship programs at Carnegie Corporation and elsewhere, and paid attention to the field of evaluation of individual grants, but I've also had the honor of, with my colleagues at the Rockefeller Archive Center, one of them is here today, Rachel Winby, and others, Marissa Vasari and Lucas Baresh, to conduct the Ford Foundation History Project over the last several years, where we have been able to use another set of Ford Foundation archives, those that are housed at the Archive Center in Tarrytown. And we look forward to working closely with our sister archive at Columbia to make those archives available as well to the scholars who are interested in the broader context of the Ford Foundation support. And from our review, Rachel's and mine, our colleagues' review of the Ford Foundation Fellowship Program, several extensive, about 14 in-depth evaluations of major fellowship programs funded by the Ford Foundation. The alumni tracking study supported by the Ford Foundation and with the close collaboration of IFP and all the fellows is responding. It shows the learning that's taking place within the foundation and by the IFP. It is responding to the major concern raised by all these evaluations, and that is how best to learn from the work of the fellows, how best to stay connected with them and keep them connected with the foundation, an issue that we haven't talked about so much today, but which is another issue that's raised by several of the fellows in their work. And finally, the broad issue of how best to deepen all of these efforts in the field, the multiplier effect that our previous panelists talked about. This tracking study and the work of IFP will be a contribution not only to the Ford Foundation's future work, but to the work of other foundations and other fellowship programs. And what's very special here as well is that the IFP, and through the tracking study as well, is building an actual, not a virtual, but an actual network. And I'm sure this network will contribute to sustaining the capacity of the fellows and transforming national and indeed our global society. So now I'd like to introduce our very special speakers this afternoon. They are, as I said, tracking the local level issues that the IFP fellows have tackled. Our first speaker, Dr. Funmi Paramalam from Nigeria, has, through the IFP, a PhD in development studies from the University of Leeds in the UK. She is a professor of gender and development at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies in Kuru, Nigeria. And she is involved in a number of other networks herself. She is a social justice activist and not only conducts research on the difficult and misunderstood subject of gender-based violence, she also, in her not much spare time, runs an NGO, a large NGO that helps vulnerable women and girls. She publishes widely in academic journals, with NGOs, in the press, in national and international organizations. Her work shows the vital importance of what has been called scientific philanthropy, getting at the root causes of a particularly thorny problem, one often discussed with considerable bias, the origins and outcomes of gender-based violence. Our second speaker is Naga Ahmed, who is a social science researcher from Egypt with a master's degree, thanks to IFP, in development from the University of London. Naga is working on her PhD at the University of Sussex in the UK. The focus of her research, relating to some of the themes we heard earlier today, is on the relationship between identity and political Islam in Egypt. She is informed by her deep professional experience in government and working with local and international NGOs in terms of training in human rights. She is also conducting in-depth qualitative research with support from both national and international organizations on this theme. She also publishes widely, like Funmi. And as part of her assessment in surveying the IFP fellows in a broad number of countries, her assessment includes a hard-hitting analysis of the concept of social justice, what we all care deeply about, but Naga is getting at what does this really mean, and its impact in society in the context of IFP's focus areas, particularly addressing this very complex link between education, training, and the concern for social justice. And our third speaker, Tai Tran, in the back, coming forward, is from Vietnam and holds an IFP-supported master's degree in international education and development with a major in technology, literacy, and languages from Columbia University. She has been teaching English as a foreign language in secondary schools in Vietnam and has received several teaching awards. She is an excellent teacher utilizing ICT. She has also worked with international and national organizations and has published significantly in the field of education. Her analyses of the IFP fellows focuses on an issue we haven't heard about today, and that is community empowerment at the very local level. How to achieve, through community empowerment, social and cultural change, political and economic improvements. Her review that we'll hear about today illustrates the complex pathways between social justice, community development, and access to higher education. So I'd like to ask Dr. Funmi to come to us. And just like the other panel, each speaker will speak for 20 minutes, and then we hope we'll have time for a few questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a great delight for me to be here this afternoon. I am really been looking forward to this opportunity to say a huge thank you to IFP, to Joan in person in particular, and to all the wonderful people who have made my stay here so easy, I would say. Much easier than it could have been. People like Andrea and Alexa, people like Celeste and Sean, and my colleagues who I've gotten to know much more about. Well, like Patricia said, I'll be looking at gender-based violence in sub-Saharan Africa, and I will be doing an integrative review. One of the reasons why I have had to, well, I will be sharing some of the reasons why I've had to look into this particular area. It will come out in the research. But many people don't know that Africa is actually leading in gender-based violence, leading the world. While global gender-based violence is a problem globally, in the sense that we have 35% of women all over the world who are victims of gender-based violence, Africa leads that figure by 45.6%. So that is a huge statistic when you think of it, that 45.6% of African women are victimized by gender-based violence. By way of a background to the study, my personal experience, not as a victim of gender-based violence, but mainly in the context of looking into the issue of sectarian violence in Nigeria. In 2010, Jos, where I live, was a city that came under intense ethno-religious violence. And in that context, women, I led a team of women to form an NGO called Queens. And that's our logo to the right of the screen there. And why we formed this NGO was that we discovered that the voice of women at the negotiating table in trying to look for peace was absent. We also found that the gender-specific issues and needs of women in the context of dealing with violence and trying to manage conflict was totally off the table. And I remember somebody said something, and it was really real to me in Nigeria. And she said, when women are not at the table negotiating for peace, they're probably on the menu. And in Nigeria, that really was the case. So many women suffered in silence, not just from the general issues of the conflict, but from gender-specific aspects of violence that were not factored in to intervention strategies. Queen set about initially looking at this issue from a humanist or humanitarian perspective. So what we were doing was just trying to provide humanitarian assistance. We set up a safe house, and we started an observatory to track the incidence and prevalence of violence. We soon discovered that that perspective or that approach wasn't sufficient. We found out that there were underlying structures of violence that we were not really looking at, and failure to address those underlying structures of gender inequality within the society, structures of oppression, was like trying to stick your finger in a dike or in a dam to stop a flood of water. And of course, it was grossly inadequate. And it was that understanding that kind of made me jump at this opportunity to come and look into gender-based violence from a cross-country perspective within the context of this fellowship. Apart from this background, like Pat also said, and I won't go much into this, I had done a lot of background research in the context of peace and security issues, looking at girls' education in Tanzania and Nigeria, and also looking into social justice within the Nigerian state. This forms some of the background literature that I had already begun to acquire. But then within the country context of sub-Saharan Africa, I'm looking into gender-based violence in 8 different African countries, where ultimately became 7, unfortunately, because I couldn't get enough material on Uganda. I'll come back to that later. But I was trying to look into the high tolerance of gender-based violence in African societies. So it's not just that we have gender-based violence leading in the world, but that there's a high tolerance for it. And also that there is institutionalized resistance to trying to promote change. And that is particularly the case in Nigeria, where over the past 10 years, 4 bills put before the National Assembly have been thrown out simply because they were bills to prevent one form of violence or the other against women and girls. So the purpose of the study was to examine the nature of and responses to gender-based violence in sub-Saharan Africa as analyzed in the studies of Ford IFP alumni, with a view to identifying promising practices that could be applicable within the Nigerian context, for instance. So the 8 countries, or the 7 countries are there: Ghana, Kenya, Mozambique, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. Originally, Uganda was included, and I was so happy because I thought I got a very good material from Uganda within the archives. But I ultimately found out that although it was written by Ugandan, it was on Kenya and Tanzania, Malawi. So I had to take that off the list of countries. My specific objectives that I set out to achieve, first and foremost, I wanted to review these studies with an emphasis on GBV within these countries, but also to do a comparative and integrative review, to synthesize and summarize the ideas, the issues. What are the main issues around GBV, and what are the approaches to tackling it within these country contexts? Other specific objectives had to do with identifying promising practices and also networking with other researchers. By way of design, my research design was very, very reflexive, very, very iterative. I had to keep, questioning my original hypothesis, my original assumptions, going back and tweaking even my research questions. So the ones I sent originally to IFP are not the ones I ended up with. And this was because as I looked into the archives, I looked into the available material, I saw areas where I had to kind of, adjust to what was available, but also to issues that were emanating from the literature. I used a qualitative research strategy, and I also did a lot of, in using a qualitative research strategy, I also tried to look at some of the material that wasn't essentially qualitative, it was quantitative, but trying to look below the layers of statistics to look at the issues identified in the theories and in the methods and findings of the studies. My research methodology involved obviously the archival research, and I am so grateful for the archives. I found a lot of material that I needed, but I also had to go outside the archives because some of the data was missing. For instance, I couldn't get a single master's dissertation or thesis from Nigeria. And that was like, I was really surprised at that. I remember engaging with Celeste on that, and even Alexa, we had to, and Andrea, we had to think of, so what do we do? Nothing from Nigeria, there wasn't anything from Mozambique, there wasn't anything from Uganda. So I had to go outside the archives to, source for materials, and thank God for ProQuest, for those of you that use ProQuest, and other search engines, like EBSCOhost, PubMed, and White Rose e-thesis online. I started out with 706 studies that I identified based on the fact that they were relevant to gender, social justice, and development issues. And after going through those studies, I was able to whittle them down to 22 studies that ended up on the basis of 2 salient criteria. First and foremost was that they were very specific to gender-based violence. And thirdly, they looked at gender-based violence from a structural perspective or a behavioral perspective. Among the studies, I had 3 scholarly papers, 9 master's dissertations, and 10 PhD theses. Now let me just highlight some of the findings from these country studies. Like I said, 22 studies, and I'd just like to bring out the salient findings as they relate to structural gender-based violence and linking it with behavioral gender-based violence. And what do I mean by the two? I think it's important that I just clarify what I mean by structural gender-based violence. I did a background study on the theory of structural violence coming from writers like Johan Galtung, who many years back in 1969 had identified that violence is not just about what one person does to another person. It's not just behavioral, it's not just interpersonal, but it's rooted in structures, social, economic, and political structures that generate or cause harm for the victims. And also structural violence is particularly insidious in that you can't hold anybody accountable. It invisibilizes the root causes of violence. So structural violence is distinguished from behavioral violence in that behavioral violence is about like spousal abuse, what one person does to another in the context of interpersonal, whether intimate partner relationships and what have you. Now, in these studies, the findings that I came across, I saw an interaction in the treatment of gender-based violence based on the structural and behavioral aspects, and that was very, very interesting. For example, Asima of Ghana, he looked at he was able to discern that egalitarian transnational spaces afford migrant Ghanaian women opportunity to renegotiate patriarchal arrangements. So patriarchy in Africa, many people bring that patriarchal mindset to Western context. But within that transnational, that changed transnational space, people renegotiate gender relations. And that renegotiation affords women the opportunity to acquire power and men the opportunity to acquire a transformatory consciousness. That's what Asima called it. And then Baka, she looked at female sexual slavery among certain groups in ethnic groups in Ghana, and she found that patriarchal ideology exerts strong social pressure that undermines women's rights legislation that is aimed at dismantling oppressive cultural practices in Ghana. So in other words, whether you have laws or policies set up to address gender-based violence, if you don't address the underlying patriarchal ideologies, very often these laws do not achieve what they are set out to achieve. Bandiaki, from Solange from Senegal, she looked into women's economic and resource management capabilities in rural Senegal. And she found that women, African women, are not just victims, they also have agency. She found that in rural Senegal, where her work was situated, that women's capacity to identify common points of interest, common points of action and leverage, to enable them act in concert is critical to effectively contesting political exclusion, cooptation, and violence by men and male elites. Brasso Antonio, this was a scholarly paper on cultural narratives of gender identity in Mozambique, he found that these narratives produce gender inequality and violence, and they must be interrogated and deconstructed before any egalitarian society can emerge. Joy Dogo of Nigeria, she looked into policies and laws in Nigeria to address violence against women and girls. And she found that the lack of political will and weak enforcement of pro-child and pro-women international laws not only allow girl-child violence to continue, girl-child marriage to continue, but it also sustains the whole rubric of violence against women and girls in that country. Kuchimi, also of Nigeria, she looked at Islamic texts and how the religious revivalism in Nigeria was at the root of a lot of violence against women and girls. For example, the Chibok girls who were captured. And she looked into those kind of issues and how the declaration of Sharia law had actually served to mark women out as boundary markers, to help men to reassert their authority and power, and is implicated in violence against women and girls all over northern Nigeria. Jatau Phoebe, she also looked into the issues of patriarchy in Nigeria within the context of education, girl-child education in northern Nigeria. And she found that girls in Nigeria, women in Nigeria, are now beginning to question totalizing, universalizing, and patriarchal ideologies contained in religion and culture. And they're beginning to challenge the hegemonic knowledges that subjugate and marginalize them within the context of persistent structural inequalities. So though you have this blanket context of women being oppressed, women are not just silently accepting or endorsing these ideologies, but within their personal spaces, they are challenging and they are questioning these contexts. Then Kaba of Ghana, she looked into structural inequalities and how they are implicated in the spread of HIV infection among women and girls, in addition to the biological susceptibility of women to the infection. Miguel Marangula, he was able to find that the experiences of street children in Maputo, Mozambique, they are strongly differentiated by gender, with boys being more predisposed to becoming street children and girls being more predisposed to sexual violence on the streets. These are just some of the findings. There are many more of them. I don't want to take too much time on the findings, but one of the things that I found that is so much that ran through as a theme among all these findings was the idea of structural violation of human rights, which was highlighted in the work of Kathleen Ho. That the theory of structural violence is linked very strongly to the structural violation of the rights of women and of disprivileged or marginalized groups. Okay, these are some more findings. In the work that I did on national policy in Nigeria, I found a very ambiguous and complicated picture. And I had asked a question, are Nigerian women really ready for gender equality? Because as I went through the field, I realized that, you know what, many women seem to be complicit in gender inequality, seem to be endorsing and accepting of gender inequality. And I found that this came as a result of the multiple and fragmented identities, the intersection of women's religious identities, their ethnic identities, their class-based identities, and all of this work to create a multiplicity of realities for women, in which at one and the same time they are endorsing and refuting the whole discourse of subjugation and what have you. I found one work that I found very, very interesting was that of Rumbo, Dorothy. And she was talking about female sexuality and reproductive health. And she found out that heterosexual liaisons were very much a risk factor in marriage. Is very much a risk factor for women. So she was trying to refute the safety net theory that said that marriage is actually supposed to be a safety net for women. And she said, no, actually, in Africa, it's the opposite. Marriage is a very high risk factor for women in terms of their health and also their mortality. Let me see if there's anything here I want to share. Let me just highlight on one of the studies by Gifty Baka, which I think it represents a very extreme form of gender-based violence, but it puts into relief all the issues that we talk about when we think about gender-based violence. She looked at the Trokosi practice in Ghana, parts of Ghana, not all of Ghana. And this Trokosi practice is essentially about women and girls, virgin girls, being offered as sacrificial lambs for their communities. What happens is this: if somebody commits a crime and maybe that person cannot be found, or that crime has caused some harm to another community, then the community from where that person came has to offer a virgin girl to the shrine gods, and the priests in that shrine have unqualified access to this girl sexually. And sometimes these girls are as young as 10 and 11. And one of the girls that she came across called Abrasewa, but she had been released from the shrine by the work of an international NGO working to release these girls from this slavery. And this is what Abrasewa said when she was 19. She said, I was brought to the shrine when I was 10. When I was 11, one night, the priest came to me in the night. I know what he wanted, but I refused. Several nights later, he came and raped me. I lay on the ground crying, while the other girls begged me to be quiet, else the priest would come back and beat me. And that's just one of the stories of some of those girls. Now, in all of this, I must say that, in all of this, I must say that there were some dissenting views. Not everybody believed that women were always victimized by culture, by social structures. And one of the studies that stands out as a dissenting voice was that written by Ogula, Edward Ogula, from Uganda, but he was the one who wrote on Malawi and Kenya and Tanzania. And he said there is no link between tenure insecurity, land tenure insecurity, under customary land tenure, and gendered access to land, credit, use of fertilizers, and agricultural productivity in East Africa. I must say that another study debunked his claims, but I felt it was important just to mention that it wasn't all everybody saying the same thing. These are some of the summaries of the findings that I had, but I think I'll just leave those and go to my conclusions and recommendations. So from these studies, I would like to advance the following recommendations, and I must say that this is a work in progress. I will still go back and work much more on this in Nigeria, but these are my preliminary recommendations. First and foremost, that they call for the need for well-designed, standardized, and rigorous situation analysis and evaluative research, mapping women's experiences of violence and the effects of GBV response mechanisms. Some of these response mechanisms deal with symptomatic issues as opposed to structural issues. In talking about these response mechanisms, special attention must be given to in-depth location-specific case studies alongside national demographic surveys for state, regional level, and policy planning. There is also the need for constructive and sensitive use of new and old media to generate transnational experiences of gender and transformatory consciousness. This came from that study on Ghana migrants, and what I'm just trying to say here is that you can't take every man out of Africa and take him to London so that he can get transformatory consciousness. But you can, through a sensitive use of media in the context of globalization, create spaces where people see alternative lifestyles and alternative ways of being, and therefore get people to develop different cultural mindsets. And I'm also saying here, I'm agreeing with my brother, Raj, who will say that Ford needs to please continue to support through technical and financial means the efforts of and initiatives of IFP alumni. I would just like to highlight two initiatives from those such alumni. Miguel Marangula, I was fascinated by his work. He did, his PhD was on action research in the streets of Maputo, looking at street children. Miguel himself was a street child, and that was why he got that vision to look into street children. And his research led to the creation of the Child to Child Association, where young people mentor each other on the streets to help them get off the streets and to become leaders themselves, to mentor people to come off the streets. Just an amazing work. And he mentioned the stories of Manuel and Maria, who also were street children and now are in gainful employment, and also they're doing social justice work. Butamo Philip, the final person I'd like to mention, is a practicing advocate, a human rights activist, and she works with the Tanzania Women Lawyers Association to help women who are victims of violence. Thank you very much for listening, and sorry that I took so long.
Good afternoon, I am Nakah Ahmed, this is my name, I am from Egypt. I was an IFP scholarship. I got the scholarship for my PhD. And I was registered at the University of Sussex. But the fact is that I discontinued my studies. And this has nothing to do with the program and has nothing to do with the university, in fact. It has to do with my personal and family socioeconomic conditions. I'm happy to talk about that if you like after the session, but this is not has nothing to do with the presentation, but I just wanted to explain my relation to this program, how it comes or where it comes from. I would like to say a few things before I start into the presentation so I can gain your understanding. First is that my English is not great. And at part of the presentation, I will be somehow critical to the program. So if you find some strong words in my talk, please know that it is not at all out of impoliteness, but it is out of lack of vocabularies. Second, I have 20 years of work experience in the field of development. I'm committed to that field. Extremely, but also I am very critical of that field. The same thing. So I don't take things for granted. It is just how I am. I'm critical of my society, of my family, of my village, of my culture. This is how I am. So please also forgive me for, I think I will say different story here. About social justice. I will look at it from a different perspective, define it probably different from other definitions that provided today with my colleagues. My research is focusing on Egypt, the IFP in Egypt. And I'm looking at the social justice impact of the program on Egypt. On Egypt, it means I'm looking at a national impact, not individual impact. So to start talking and delivering my findings, I would start by defining social impact. What do we mean by social impact? We all talk since the morning, we are talking about social impact without defining it. How the IFP defines social justice. How the Egyptians think of social justice. And then I can relate the program and see how has it been influential on my society in terms of improving the status of social justice. Here we have different views and different definitions. I am going to go through all these views and come to conclusions. My research relied heavily on qualitative interviews, so it is not at all representative. I interviewed only 10 fellows. Half of them were men, half of them were women. They were from Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. But the thing that is important about that is the fact that I interviewed them by myself. I didn't interview them through the IIE. And I have a concern here. If I am a fellow and someone called me from Ford Foundation or from IIE and asking me about my commitment to social justice and what did I do for social justice in my country, I will absolutely find a way to have something to report. So I prefer not to go through this way, even though I faced difficulties to find the fellows, because I didn't have data, I didn't have access to them. I contacted the Ahmed East, the local partners, and they were like, don't talk about that. The project get to an end and we don't have information to get. Okay, help me through your personal relations. They didn't help. At the end, I was navigating the website of the program and I come across a documentary documenting the case of Egypt, and I have been hearing a fellow talking about her experience. A documentary means that they selected the very successful case studies to talk in a documentary. So one of the girls was talking about herself and she mentioned an NGO she worked in and how great work she does with this NGO in terms of social justice and the impact on the society, etc. By chance, I knew this NGO. So I found this is my way, okay. I will find the girl and from there I will start. In fact, I had evaluated this NGO when I was working in some other NGO, and we were building a database for local NGOs to evaluate these NGOs in order to decide to fund them or not. I had a team of evaluators who were working with me. I called the girl who was working with me and said, Nashwa, please contact this NGO and ask them about this name and try to help me to get in contact with her. It succeeded and we met, and from there I started. The first girl connected me to the other one, and the other one connected me to the other one. So instead of having the whole list of fellows and have a random sample, I applied a snowball sampling, which was not my intention. But fortunately, it came representative to a great extent, by chance, but I didn't mean that. So we had hours of talking. I visited them in their homes, part of them. And the other part, we interviewed on a coffee shops. So I had the eye impressions. I saw the social context. I saw how they live, how they think. This is all because, as I told you, I have a problem with the issue of development, especially in terms of the successful case stories or case studies. I'm talking here about another different experience. In 2005, I was working to another NGO, and I was assigned to write successful case studies for an education program. they told me, we know the cases. We have a field communication officers. He will introduce them to them. You only document the case. I'm a good writer, by the way, in Arabic. I write very well. And I can have drama around the case and make it really readable. So they told me about a man. By the way, he's not this man. I just brought a picture, looks like him. About this man who donated all his property, which was 6 carat of agricultural land. He donated it to the program as a partnership with the international NGO to build a primary school in the village, because the goal of the program was to increase access to education. So how wonderful. And he's the poorest one in the village, even though he donated his land, because he believed in education. He believed in what we are doing. Come and document the case. I went down here, by the way, this was in Upper Egypt, in a very poor rural area. I went down there and they had a focus group discussion, and the man was among others. The 10 persons were there who usually work in the field of development, understand this language very well, those community leaders. And the man was one of the community leaders. And we started to talk about his donation, the school, the status of education, etc. And everybody was talking except this man. And everybody was praising him and showering him with gratitude and love and how great he is. But the man doesn't talk. Then I looked at him and said, Haj Muhammad, why don't you talk? And he said, oh, they are saying everything. They know better than me. I said, but you are the owner of the land. You are who contributed to that. I said, okay, but they say. I insisted him to talk. I'm telling that for a purpose, not just to make an introduction to my talk, but I have a messages to deliver here. When I insisted, he said, I can't talk because I can't say more than what they are saying. I stood up and closed the door of the room and I said, look, say whatever you would like to say, and I promise you, no one who ever can touch you. Forget about what they are saying. I'm not going to tell the NGO what did you say. And if anyone said, no, they all know the truth. And I discovered the truth is that the land was not owned by Haj Muhammad. It was a public utility land. But Haj Muhammad was using it according to the Agricultural Reform Law of 1952. And he was waiting for the time that the government will make him have ownership of the land by a new law of reform. What happened is that the prestigious, highly reputable international NGO lobbied the governor and forced Haj Muhammad to evacuate the land and leave it. And when he resisted, they put him in jail for 12 days. So he never volunteered, in fact. But they didn't lie when they said the community donated the land. They didn't lie because the land was donated. They didn't lie about that. But unless, this is the message I would like to extend here, unless I met him face to face and read his face impressions and read the whole environment of the room we were talking in and insisted to know, we wouldn't have known that. So online data collections is excluding great part of information base. I am unhappy with that. Okay, they didn't lie, but they didn't say the full truth. When they told me the full truth about it, maybe I would have thought that Haj Muhammad is a selfish man. Why he keep the land? It's better to donate it to the community. And I would have asked him, why did you do that? But hide that, it means they knew they were doing something wrong. They didn't get the rich to donate the land. They didn't get the rich to partner with it. They got the poorest of the poor and take all what he owned from his property, and they shower him by praise and compliment in order to silence him, not out of really respecting him, but to keep him, doesn't talk about it. This culture of development makes me very critical, and sometimes I get very angry when there are exaggeration or too much focus on successful case studies, because it misinforms the development society, the scientific society, the discipline of social science, the discipline of humanity, the policymakers. It misinforms us. Nothing wrong to say we faced difficulties that the society didn't contribute. Nothing wrong with that. We had a good intention, great intention, but it didn't work. Nothing wrong. But let us say the truth, the full truth. We should not abuse the poor. So I am not, unless there is a proper, well-designed, comprehensive scientific studies, I don't consider what is reported as success. Through full reliance on successful case studies, I can say this project is successful. I can take it. So I didn't focus that much about case studies in my research. And also I didn't use any direct questions. When I asked the fellows about social justice, I didn't ask them, as I saw in fact in the questionnaires adopted, tell me about the biggest social justice impact the project has done for you. Come on. I would absolutely think of something positive to report. I took the scholarship based on the fact that I am socially committed. You ask me about impact, I would tell you, well, it's wonderful, I did that, I did. These are self-reported statements. We cannot calculate it and consider this as a scientific studies. We have to really do it in a different way. I'm saying that here out of respect to this program, because it gave me opportunities, not only one. I am here today, even though I discontinued my studies. And I told them when I applied for this award, by the way, I told them I didn't complete my studies. And they gave me the award. Ford Foundation is highly prestigious NGO, and so is the IIE. So I would like really to see comprehensive scientific, to be leading and adopting a leading role in that, reducing the focus or the reliance on the successful case studies. Successful case studies can help in eliminating, explaining what the scientific research results say, but it doesn't provide evidence for final scientific research conclusions. This is the first note. I talked too much of that. I'm sorry. But I wanted to get it out. Now we are focusing on Egypt. This is the map of Egypt. Different colors means different states or different governorates. Those are the fellows, 169 were from 25 governorates. 2 governorates were not represented. As you see, Cairo and Alex are gaining the highly over-represented. So if you see, the fellows are coming from the Delta, and few of them coming from Upper Egypt, which is the part of the south. But we can say that the program did wrong in that respect, in fact, because Egypt is like that. It's like 80% of the population live on 4% of the land. So it is fair representation. This is my research methodology I told you about, so I'm not going to stay here too much. I reviewed other, additional to the qualitative work, I reviewed some other reports and research tools in the library since I arrived. These were my research questions. What was the program definition of social justice? This was very major, important questions for me. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to make any conclusion. How and to what extent alumni contributed to social justice in Egypt, of course, and what are methodologies through which program has assessed the effect of its alumni, and finally, what are the factors, methods, mechanisms through which IFP program ensured that its Egyptian alumni would contribute to the change of their communities. This is the description of my sample. As I told you, I just explaining what did they study, where they are coming from. I faced some difficulties. I wanted to have full access to the database of Egyptian alumni, which was a little bit, it was denied. I couldn't have access to that. I couldn't have access to the project design, but I found in some other places the mission and the objective of the program. Absence of the definition. I ran through many documents and I didn't find that the program defined social justice. Probably it is defined somewhere else. I didn't come across, but of what I read, and I came late, I spent only 1 week in the library. Of what I read, I didn't see a definition of social justice. It is, as we are talking today, it's taken for granted that it is understood. We all know what, I didn't start yet. Okay. Okay. The program has two components in my view. One main, which is the scholarship itself, and the second complementary part, which is the training on social justice to produce those emergent leaders. I am coming from this country where millions of people marched in the streets to call for livelihood, freedom, social justice, and human dignity. So my understanding of social justice means that those leaders who are capable to make change in my country, those people who are capable to influence the policymakers, it is not to my understanding that those individuals who are able to start literacy classes or women empowerment class program. No, those are community leaders. Those are not, in my view, those are not social justice leaders. Those are community leaders. The program is much higher, much significant, much important than that. The revolution in Egypt failed because they didn't define social justice for other reasons also. But Ford Foundation, in fact, when I was searching for a definition, I found they have defined it. Maybe it is not written, but it is there. The way, the design of the program, the way it was implemented shows that they have a definition of social justice. And in fact, they have the broadened definition of social justice. That is of John Rawls' theory of justice. John Rawls' theory of justice defines social justice not as equality. In fact, he thought that equality pertained inequality. In a way, if you distribute equal opportunities to unequal people, you sustain the inequality as it is. He asked for opportunities for the disadvantaged, which is the program did. Straight away, I can't argue with that. And in fact, the program was unique, really unique, very generous. And that's why this part should be documented and over-analyzed. I see it is under-analyzed. They delivered this pre-enrollment training, family care allowance. Students were able to take their families with them if they are studying abroad. Taking into consideration the fact that John Rawls said when he said that the poor inherit the socio-economic background of their families. So if you deliver equal opportunities, you're still leaving those people behind because they can't catch up with the others unless you compensate about their socio-economic backgrounds. But he said also freedom. Freedom, liberty is before and first. Liberty is the foundation for social justice. As well as John Rawls said was Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen took Amartya Sen. He has a whole book entitled Development as Freedom. He talked about increasing individuals' capabilities to make free choice. which is IFP did. It gave them capabilities, economic capabilities, educational capabilities, and they had also. Should I stop there? I didn't start. What should I do? Okay. I want, because I criticize them, I want to show also the bright side of it. So the evidence from Egypt says the designs of the program, of the education part of it, of the scholarship, of bringing those people to study postgraduate studies was wonderful. It broke the barriers that were laid around them. Bodhi talked today about the fact that the literature focused on the impact on the scholarship, on the scholars, and he criticized that. I think Ford Foundation should focus on that because they selected a different group. Other scholarships select like any other scholarship, but the IFP focused on those who are denied access, those who are disadvantaged. So their experience is different. The impact on them is different, and it deserves documentations because there are great deal of knowledge there. Let me just, because these are their words, in fact, and I would feel guilty if I didn't say them. I was working in the media despite I didn't study media. It was impossible for me to study media before the IFP. I was the third one of my graduation cohort. Nevertheless, the university did not appoint me and give my position to the son of one of the teachers. I experienced the bitterness taste of oppression and decided to forget about postgraduate studies and worked as a salesperson. The IFP returned me back to life and my area of interest. I wouldn't look at the personal impact only on that. But this person, if he didn't got another opportunity, no one knows how would he go. Maybe he could be a terrorist one day. We don't know. So this fellowship contributing to the world peace, in fact. It gives opportunity to those who are oppressed. I was divorced, this is the third one, and I had a child. I was under severe cultural pressure and unable to go out of my community and escape the oppression of the oppressor cultural siege that was laid around me. Of course, the scholarship gave her the prestigious, the reason to flee out, and she studied in the UK. It helped the fellows to prove themselves. They discovered they are capable to do it. And in fact, they struggled to do it. It was not that easy at all, even though they are giving pre-enrollment training, generous allowance, a great deal of caring, but they still struggled because some of them were working, and they told me that I was working. I am a woman, and I can't afford to stop working and not to have my monthly income. Even though the English classes was afternoon, I had no time to finish my work at 5 and then go to the English classes and then go back home to cook for my children and look after my husband and so on. So I didn't attend the classes, but when I traveled, I had the dictionary with me all the time. And one of them said, I used to read the page in 3 hours, which for the American citizen or the American student who would read in 1 minute. So they struggled. They still struggle, and their struggle should be appreciated, reputable, displayed, and promoted. You should give them some more recognition. It connected them to the world. Absolutely. Here is what I say. It should be emphasized that they saw the world differently. Yes, other scholarships do the same effect, but not with this specific social group. And here is the difference. They knew their rights, of course, and we can talk and elaborate with that one day. Okay, I can stay here. I can say this is the other part of social justice which I would like to. Okay, the program assumed that giving the fellows the opportunity to study and giving them the social justice training and forums for interaction will make them social justice leaders. And this proved, in the case of Egypt, not true. It's not true. To give them social justice training for 1 week doesn't make a person to be a social justice leader. No. And education doesn't guarantee a leadership skills. Education is different. It guarantees an intellectual skills. But if the person was already leader, that's okay. Then he will become a leader, an educated leader, a more intellectual leader. But it doesn't build a leadership skills. So 1 week training and website portal is not enough to make leaders. Oh, okay, this is how the program reported on itself, emerging social justice leaders. I was unhappy to receive these statements. I can't hide it. I can't hide it because in Egypt, for instance, we have, according to the way the IIE evaluate the program, in Egypt we have 169 social justice leaders. Yes, even though we have this girl who was detained for 3 years in prison because she's a feminist, because she's advocating human rights. Not only this, we have all those numbers. We are here talking about freedom, the foundation of social justice. Freedom, development as freedom. This is how social justice should be defined. It is not to go and work for grassroots development and consider this a social justice. Forget about that. I'm exaggerating now and over-expecting from the programs. Forget about that. These are the views of the fellows I interviewed about social justice. I participated in social justice program, and I hear words like justice, poverty, employment, etc. I worked online and produced policy paper, but I don't believe in equality in postgraduate education. Equality is against fairness. IFP made mistake by granting the poor and government workers. They can't make a difference. Money invested in those poor are lost. These words are by IFP graduates who hold PhDs and master's degree. They didn't change even their attitude. The 1 week training, I'm saying this is not to generalize. These are only 10 persons. But these views are there. The training didn't even change their knowledge of social justice, their attitude. They believe because the group, when we say disadvantaged, they are not homogeneous groups. Consider that, please. Because the 10 person I interviewed, one of them was the son of 2 university teachers. One got his PhD from the US and the mother got her PhD from France. And the other one was the son of a rural farmer. So they are not the same. You still have differences inside within the disadvantaged group. And here are the views are also different. I have to stop here. I am very sorry if I was overcritical. I'm very sorry. It's out of my deep and sincere respect to this program. I have many other things to say. I have recommendations at the end, but maybe I should, only one thing I would like to say. Only once. Quickly, one slide. This is a successful case study according to the way that the program reports on its success stories. He's a university teacher. He won 2 prizes. Suzanne Mubarak, the one that we hosted him in 2011. He got Suzanne Mubarak Prize for Women Empowerment. He got Haeckel Prize for, and he has publications. He's doing great, but for me, he is not a leader. The leaders are those 2 I would like to talk to. And probably the Ahmed East will never come across them or report on them. The poet. The poet is one who got the fellowship, and he got his PhD. He is now in Turkey, promoting democracy and fighting against a military ruling system in my country. The judge, finally, the judge issued unprecedented sentence for divorced father to have the right to host their children for a week, which was forbidden in Egypt. By this sentence, all courts in Egypt are applying this sentence now. This is social justice impact, because you can measure it. by looking at the number of divorced fathers and see how they are enjoying this right now. Thank you, and thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Afternoon. Based on the schedule, I think I have only 1 minute to talk. Anyway, I try to be brief in my presentation. My name is T, and I'm really glad to reconnect, to have a chance to reconnect to IFP program and also Columbia University, because I spent 2 years at the university, and I'm really glad about that. My topic is about IFP vision through the lens of Vietnamese IFP alumni, and analysis of thesis. The reason for undertaking the project is that we recognize a large number of IFP alumni theses have not been explored. I would like to see the whole picture of the IFP program through analyzing the thesis of great numbers of the IFP Vietnam alumni. And it's also an example of how to use the information on the Columbia IFP Archive for research purposes. And then the last reason, as you know, that we have the IIE's 10 years alumni check-in study, and I hope that my research is going to be a supplementary research for this check-in study. I have 4 questions that I would like to reach after this research. The first question is that what were the research themes of the IFP Vietnam alumni graduate thesis? What locations and what target groups did the IFP alumni graduate thesis focus on? What is the relation between the program, the IFP vision, and then Vietnam's IFP alumni thesis? And how do the research finding benefit the alumni's current employers and communities? Regarding the research, I collected and analyzed 151 IFP Vietnam alumni thesis, which was like more than 12,000 pages. So the minimum numbers of pages of the thesis is a 10 page to 200 page. So it's quite a work. And then I also categorize the demographics of the writers, and also design and distribute the online survey to 142 alumni. The reason why we have 142 because some of the emails were not correct. They are the findings of the research. Firstly, I would like to mention about the demographics of the thesis writers. 58% were female and 42% were male. These are the research like thesis writers. It's not the demographics of the IFP Vietnam alumni. And they they follow around like 48 area of studies, and you could see from the figures that the most fields of study that they follow were sustainable development, TESOL, international development, and social change, regional and rural developments. These are the methods of data collection of the thesis writers. So most of them, they use the case study, which show that like the thesis writer didn't just sit there at the university and did the desk research. They went to the field, interviewed with the key informants, did the observation, did field trips. So you could see from the graphs that like many of the research apply the case study as the methods of the data collection, which was really good, because it was also a chance for them to connect and to, to convey the information or the message of the social justice to the various of stakeholders at the community. Regarding the first question about the themes of the Vietnamese IFP alumni's graduate thesis, you could see from the graphs that most of the topics of the thesis focus on development, which is about like sustainable development, social work, community development. Some of them focus on education, especially teaching English as a foreign language or management, and the rest were about environment, health, economics, etc. When I looked at I analyzed the abstracts on the research and made the word clouds of the keywords, you could see some emerging topics of the thesis, like English as a second language, sustainable development, education, participation, local and government coordination, empowerment. And when I went deeper into the findings and the conclusion as well as the recommendation, it have the kind of similar picture that you could see that there are some really big emerging topics like participation, local people, women, governments. So you kind of see what kind of topics or the target groups that the thesis focus on based on these word clouds. And when I analyzed the testimonies of many of them, of the research, there was a couple of big themes emerging. The first is about the participatory approach. And the writers analyzed different programs and projects on the level of like participation of different stakeholders, especially local community and the beneficiaries. And for example, like in this screen, you could see like one alumni explored a project about community forestry initiative and analyzed like actually the participatory approach was set up by that project. However, in reality, they didn't do that. And then they didn't pay attention to the like geographical, economical, and social dimensions of the initiative participants. For example, there was some like ethnic minority people. They didn't know they didn't know how to speak or write in Vietnamese, whereas the document were in Vietnamese or something like that. But another example about some projects, they kind of like promote the participatory approach, like that Chia Sẻ program, which was a kind of poverty reduction program initiated by one NGO and government. The program empowered the villagers by involve them in decision making, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. So there was like contradictory pictures of different programs related to the participatory approach. The next topic that many of the thesis focus on was empowerment, and you could see that there were 4 kinds of empowerment. Pat may correct me about that. So we have individual empowerment, political empowerment, social empowerment, and economical empowerment. I would like to show a picture of a NIPCO project. Is a project to create the jobs for the disabled people. And in this project, the disabled people have a chance to take part in the vocational training how to make products out of coconut shells. And by involving in this project, the participants who were disabled people, they had opportunities to increase their income, which is like economic empowerment. At the same time, they also participated in social cultural activities without like social cultural empowerment. They also have a right to speak up. So they feel more confident and they feel more self-reliant in their life. So it's a really nice project. And some of the microcredits programs also empower the beneficiary, especially women's empowerment. And it's very interesting that in some community development project, the writer not only focus on the project in itself, but like the content of the project, but went deeper into analyzing the social aspects of the project. One of the projects, like supply and sanitation project, they explore, they provide the different like facilities for the Khmer people community. However, they didn't involve the Khmer women. So Khmer women, even they actually in traditional, they don't usually socialize much. But the project in itself make the women's role more invisible. And then they actually have a kind of triple roles, not only like reproductive or productive roles, but they also have to work like outside of their own roles. So those kind of problem is just like immersion. The third topic is about local assets and sustainability. Some projects, some thesis writer believe that the only way or the very important way to reach sustainability is to recognize and mobilize the local assets of the community, what we often call the assets-based community development. And one of the 6 important capitals of asset-based community assets is the social capital. As Budi already kind of mentioned about like the networks, and the social capital seems the very important factor to help the poor to tackle the obstacles. For example, like in some upgrading urban project in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, the people, like the Chinese and Vietnamese people, have to move to some area, and then they have to, live close together to mobilize their social network to overcome their programs. However, in some projects like natural conservation or livelihood development project, they are not sustainable because they didn't take the knowledge and skill of the local people into practice. And the next topic is about government and local people coordination, which is very important. I will go a little bit fast about this one. And as you know, that there was some thesis writer about the ESL topic, and if you have a chance to read them, it's very interesting because they're gonna tell you about their stories before they got the scholarship, the obstacles they had when they access to education, and how they learn from the graduate program. The second question about location and target groups, the study size of the research were mainly in province, commune, and school districts. So it's really kind of really community-based, not just at the university. These are the targets group of the research that they conducted, and you could see from the figures that many of them focus on doing the research about the issues of the ethnic minority or local people. In education is about students and teachers and women and farmers. So the target group were mainly the marginalized people from the disadvantaged areas. The third question is about social justice, community development, and access to higher education. In regarding to community development, in order to make it more successful, the researcher recommend to consider gender sensitivity, local tradition and value, participatory approach, and asset-based community. Social justice, many of you already mentioned much about that. Some of the research mentioned about the condition of some like disadvantaged people, like old people living in the rural area, women and disabled women, migrants, homosexual men, ethnic minority people, accessing to different public service or have some difficulties in life. Fourth question, only 1 minute. Research findings and benefits to the IFP Vietnam. I did one survey, online survey. Unfortunately, I didn't receive many of the respondents, only 20%. And then you could see that the question is, my research has been used to improve the target groups of the research. Many of them agree, but there were 24% not agree or disagree. So there was some perception about that, if you could. However, most of them said that they have made a significant impact in their community. Reflection. I think this is a very inspiring journey. It's a lot of work, but it's an inspiring journey. I could see the big picture of the Vietnam IFP alumni's achievement, their commitment to community development and social justice. It's a learning opportunities, and it's also keep the IFP, IFP program candles continue to light in my life. Because whenever I do some research or do something with the IFP alumni, my motivation or my candle still like bright up, and I feel more motivated to do more. And I would like to thank you, the IFP program. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my husband and my daughter, Maya, who who go to sleep at 8 p.m. instead of 11 p.m. so that I could do the research. Thank you very much.
Congratulations to all of the presenters. These were okay. Yes, great. So congratulations to all the presenters. These were wonderful and provocative presentations. I know you could have all gone on for much longer, which is good, because you certainly don't want to be left with nothing to say. It's much preferable to leave the audience wanting more. I have two reflections. One, that both Funmi and Tran's presentation demonstrated in a way that was very gratifying to me one outcome of the program that we thought was absolutely critical, which is to say IFP fellows not simply as consumers of knowledge, but as generators of knowledge. This is tremendous, and this, given, despite the heterogeneity of the groups, the disadvantage. Naga, I have a few comments on your presentation. You're absolutely dead right about that. There was a great deal of heterogeneity. But one very important point that we saw as unifying the program across the world was that the fellows would generate knowledge from their own perspective as researchers, as university professors, as academicians, or as community development activists. So if one wants to talk about the impact of the program, the idea that people who otherwise wouldn't have the credibility, legitimacy, knowledge to actually generate knowledge that could be shared in academic publications, for example, can now do that and add a voice, that is a very profound impact of the program. And I would just add to that by saying that the Vietnamese case is particularly interesting because I think it's fair to say that of all the selection processes, because of the way that was run by CVIN, the local partner, it was very focused on community development. And the work that you see, and the majority of the students studying development-related issues, therefore had that multiplier effect immediately on community-based development. So that was one very particular example. But that's my general takeaway from those two presentations, how important it is to see the intellectual products of the fellows as the next step. They're taking up the mantle of debating ideas, the freedom that Naga talked about. Naga, one comment about your very provocative and interesting presentation. I think you are on target to say that there was a tension in the program between a higher education objective and a development objective. It wasn't an easy marriage. And I often used to say that this was a development program that operated through higher education. To other audiences, I said exactly the opposite. And it wasn't necessarily an easy relationship. And I think I would just also underscore, I've often thought, and now that I actually run a development studies program, this comes even clearer to me. I think we should write a great book called Projects That Fail. And I think that, so I take your point that a sanitized version of success, which makes everybody look good, and you can't possibly disagree with, does not advance our understanding. So you're totally and absolutely correct about that.
Before we turn to the final part of the meeting, I just want to ask everybody to join me in applauding these two panelists.
Wow, what an inspiring day. You all are a passionate bunch. I'm so energized by your work. I will try to keep this to 5 so that I'm not held responsible from keeping you from a glass of wine and maybe something to eat. I want to thank everyone for being here and joining us today, and special thanks to the Columbia University Libraries for hosting this event, and to IIE for their ongoing commitment to sharing the legacy of IFP. My name is Kay Lee, and I am a senior manager in the Office of Strategy and Learning at the Ford Foundation. I'm also joined by Lori Mataya, who served as the grants manager for IFP for 15 years, as well as Therese Mai and Nikki Ladico from our information management team. Jane Poland, who has been so critical in helping us to manage the IFP Knowledge Management Project, is also here with us. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their support on this program. We are committed to the legacy of IFP, and we are very excited to be here. It is an honor to be here today to acknowledge the incredible work of so many people. In 2001, I was fresh out of graduate school from this very institution, no less, and hired to work as a consultant in a very small office that had just been created and was starting to take shape. It turns out that I was hired by Joan to work for the IFP Secretariat, and at that point, we were still determining selection criteria for the fellows and trying to figure out how to work with IFP partners around the world for that very first cohort. So little did I know that I would be here 15 years later to talk about the impact of the program, and it is a wonderful homecoming on so many fronts. On behalf of Hillary Pennington, our Vice President, who is traveling out of the country this week and who oversees the IFP program, I would like to take this opportunity to thank several important people for their hard work and dedication in creating this impressive archive project and for putting together the program today. In particular, Sean Quimby, Stephen Davis, and Celeste Brewer, who have been incredible partners. Also from Columbia, Matt Hampel, Jane Gorjevsky, Dina Sokolova, and the staff at the Faculty House. I would also like to thank Joan Dassin for traveling to share your reflections on IFP, and to Rajika and to Pat for moderating fascinating panels. And of course, congratulations indeed to our 6 extraordinary research award winners who have traveled from around the world to be with us this summer and to utilize this incredible resource at Columbia. The program would not be what it is without your passion and dedication and commitment to social justice, so thank you very much to the 6 of you. As we've seen and heard today, the legacy of IFP extends far beyond the numbers or the classroom. And though IFP has concluded, its story and work continue to resonate. Not only are fellows creating change for individuals and communities around the world, but the program also serves as a model for philanthropists, policymakers, and higher education leaders. That is why we at the Ford Foundation are continuing to partner with IIE and Columbia to share the lessons learned from IFP. It is our hope that convenings like today serve as a resource to anyone who wants to start or improve higher education scholarship programs. But we also hope that discussing the examples from programs like IFP inspires donors and institutions alike to take risks and design innovative, transformational programs. To that end, we'll be hosting an event at the Ford Foundation next week on Monday called Funding Futures, where we'll further explore the role of scholarships as agents of social change and be joined by IFP alum, leading philanthropists, and higher education experts from around the world. You can follow this conversation via live stream and on Twitter with the hashtag #ScholarsForChange, and that's the number 4. Along with the event, we're also launching an online resource guide for donors, which will share many of the examples, stories, and lessons learned. We hope that you will all take a look and join the conversation. Finally, let me say how happy we are to see some of our IFP alum reunited. And following on Raj's idea of a network, Ford is committed to keeping the IFP networks alive. We are working with IIE in our regional offices to stay connected with alum, many of whom have moved on to prominent positions in government and NGOs. Just last week, 30 alum from Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal convened in Lagos and had a wonderful reunion. We hope to see more of those. I would like to end by sharing a funny story to highlight what happens when people are not connected. There is an IFP fellow in South Africa who is now the head of communications at a Cape Town-based NGO. As far as we know, she has not been in touch with other fellows. I've been told that she has felt so much gratitude for this opportunity to be an IFP fellow and had so much energy and didn't know how to express her appreciation. So you can guess what she ended up doing with that energy. She went out and bought a Ford car. Unfortunately, she did not realize that the Ford Foundation is not connected in any way to Ford Motors. Imagine if she had been a part of Raj's network, could unleash that energy to a different place. But the lesson here for us at Ford is that we know that fellows have a huge desire to stay connected, and we are trying to capture and harness the post-fellowship energy to advance our work. So thank you again for joining us today. Thank you again, Columbia University, and for all you do to advance social justice and positive change in higher education and in your communities. Thank you.